This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution, and today I am joined all the way from New Zealand, Tamra Kelly-Washington, who is the winemaker at both Seresin and Kelly-Washington Wines. How are you today?
Hi, Jamie. I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me on board.
Well, it's very nice to have you. Now, I guess my first question for you would be, what are you up to today? This is early in the morning for you, but what does your workday have ahead of you?
Yes, today is a catch-up day because we're in the midst of school holidays here in New Zealand.
Oh, I
So
see.
we've just come back from a little kind of camping trip up North Island, and so I've got quite a lot to do. I'm actually not down in Marlborough. I head to Marlborough on Sundays, which is the day after tomorrow, for the week. So I'll be actually starting all of our early blends for our Momo wines from Seresin, which are more classically made. So the finished fermentation, we're starting to blend. But as of today, for the rest of today, I'll just be catching up, looking at analysis and talking to some of my guys down there, and getting ready for my trip. Yeah.
Now, we're coming up to International Sauvignon Blanc Day, and I'm guessing that Sauvignon Blanc is quite a large part of your life.
It actually is. It's been a very close confidant and friend for a number of years now. When I think back to, actually, my first vintage ever was with Seresin back in the late 90s, and I was a very green, extremely green, a bit like the grape, Sauvignon grape, very green student. Well, no, I just finished university and it was my first real proper vintage, and I was working with a lot of Sauvignon Blanc then. Introduction to sort of cool climate winemaking, and kind of caught the buzz, like there's something about Sauvignon. And I know because, Marlborough is predominantly Sauvignon Blanc, let's face it, and it's a really important variety for our region. And some people can get a little bit Sauvignon Blanc'd out, if you know what I mean, a little bit over making Sauvignon Blanc, but I never have. I just love it. And now what we're doing with Sauvignon is quite different, and our approach and how we're interpreting the variety and actually bringing that forward into the wine styles we're making. We're kind of approaching it like we approach Chardonnay, which is really fun because I love Chardonnay very much too.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you were a lab technician at Seresin all that time ago?
Yes, I was. My first, no, actually, so I did 2 vintages at Seresin. Okay. So I kind of been that terrible because they had me back, right?
Okay.
In my green student days. My first vintage, I was in the cellar,
I see.
Pulling hoses and things like that. And then I went over to Napa after that vintage and got some more experience, and got a bit shocked, I think, and it was working for quite a big place in Napa. And then to the Hunter, because you can actually fit a little Hunter Valley vintage in before coming back.
So you squeezed in an extra vintage with, right.
I squeezed one in. I must have been really kind of, trying to do as much as I could to learn, realizing how much I didn't know probably, and still don't know now. Yeah. And then back to Seresin, where I worked in the lab for the second vintage.
All right, I see. It's just so interesting that you've come all the way back to Seresin after being
I know.
I mean, you've made wine all over now, haven't you?
I have, and I think certainly having gained all the experience over in Europe, I worked for a long time in Italy, and Michael Seresin, the owner of Seresin, is very much in love with Italy. He has a place down in Tuscany, and we often speak to each other in Italian. Okay. Which is quite cool. So it's nice coming back to Seresin and sort of being able to understand a little bit about Michael's philosophy with wines and life, I suppose. Having had a bit of, good European experience, I think that does sort of change your thinking and your approach to winemaking too.
Of course. Now, where do you feel Sauvignon Blanc sits on the world wine stage today?
Where does it sit?
Yeah.
Oh, it's at the number 1 place for sure.
Okay, I knew you were going to say
that. Look, I think certainly it's quite difficult to drink a Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough and not say, if you like Sauvignon and drink Sauvignon Blancs, and not say that is a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. And I think that's what is so wonderful about our variety that we have in Marlborough, you know, and how we make our wines from the special conditions we have in Marlborough, is that it is just so unique and so powerful that it's quite hard to sort of replicate that. Of course, you know, there are the other varietal characteristics you get from other places, you know, in France, Loire, Chile, places like that. But it's a combination of the acidity and the concentration and power of flavor that we get that is just, it almost sums up New Zealand, you know. It's that sort of very clean and green and crunchy and fresh, you know. It's wonderful.
What do you put that down to exactly? That absolutely unmistakable character of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc?
Look, it's a number of factors, and I think, you know, there have been books written about it and lots of research done, and I think definitely our special climate that we have, because, you know, I've worked in a number of wine regions all around the world, especially in that period leading up to vintage and during vintage, and I've never worked in a place, and even in any other places within New Zealand, that you have these conditions of these, the bright sun and quite warm, not too warm though, sort of, you know, anywhere between coming into vintage 20 to sort of 25-degree days, perhaps a little bit more than 25 degrees. But then your night temperature can be down at 10. It's a big, what they call the diurnal shift, diurnal change in temperature. And that really helps our ripening process go very slowly, you know, and the flavors are locked in. The acidity holds, you know, we don't lose acidity very often at all. So you're harvesting this fruit that is perfectly ripened, still with lots of acidity, you know, very clean fruit, very fresh, and often cold fruit, because you're harvesting during these conditions during the night, and it's, you know, so it's wonderful.
Now, I don't think everyone realizes, but Marlborough is not exactly homogenous when it comes to terroir, is it?
No, not at all. And that's a really good point, actually. Look, there's a lot of different microclimates within Marlborough, but I know that we talk quite often of the three clear sort of sub-regions. You know, there's the Awatere Valley, which is in the south. Then the Southern Valleys, which is sort of going to the sort of north, south, west, sort of the western side. And then the Wairau, which is the flats going down, right down into the sort of Cloudy Bay area. And those three different sub-regions produce quite different styles of Sauvignon. You know, you've within the Awatere Valley, often the last sub-region to harvest, a lot cooler. You're getting a lot more of those very leafy, crunchy, quite herbal notes coming through in your Sauvignons. The Wairau, and in particular the lower Wairau, which is kind of like a sub-region, you're getting those big, almost get I don't know if you get the blackcurrant sparkle lollies here, but
I've picked up on that.
So much style that they almost go into a confected sort of lolly sparkle, kind of beautiful though, like really fruity, passion fruit, white passion fruit. And then the Southern Valley areas for me, which is actually the place where we get fantastic Pinot Noir, but you're actually getting a little bit more, less style, and it's quite but warmer up there during the day, more of your sort of you can get quite tropical, you know, autumnal fruits, but also quite tropical fruits, quite ripe flavors of Sauvignon. And it's actually fantastic to produce Sauvignons like from a single site, which is what we do, which is great. But even at the same time, actually making a blend from the different sub-regions is also really fun, because you're really sensing the different sorts of styles coming in from the different regions, sub-regions, and you can really kind of tailor make a Sauvignon Blanc exactly to how you want it, which is cool too.
Now, what kind of fashions have you seen come and go with regards to vinification of Sauvignon Blanc in your time making? wine from Sauvignon Blanc?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's become a lot more automated. I mean, I think about back in the day when, very rudimentary kind of ways to analyze the fermentation process, not really having very good the temperature control, and the tanks was also very rudimentary, just opening and closing valves. Now we've got these systems that you just punch a number onto your computer, the valve will open itself and the temperature will hold exactly where you want it. You can do a lot more from being off-site. So me being in Waihiki's actually not such a big deal. I can log in and look at what's happening to all of my tanks. I don't need to talk to anybody. I can just see it right then and there, which is great. So it's probably those days where winemakers, there's tales of winemakers sleeping on the tanks, not going home, pulling 20-hour shifts, right? So I guess it's enabled winemakers to actually get home to their families a bit more and be a little bit more relaxed. Things are in good hands, that they've got good technology, especially over that time of fermentation and vintage time, where pretty much everything happens. Then you have to be be sure and confident in your processes. Definitely, look, as we talked about earlier, more organic fruit, wild fermentation, pushing the boat out a bit more with Sauvignon Blanc. Right. So, making it a little bit more like how we make Chardonnay, using lots of lees, like I love doing, using small vessels, not using stainless steel, but using oak, neutral oak barrels, using, cement tanks, using amphora. I think, I don't know how I see it, I'm finding that Sauvignon's a lot more, I've got a lot more confidence in it, that it's a lot more resilient than what I thought. And that could be up to sort of, vine age. I think, we're seeing Sauvignon with a bit of vine age now, natural balance, it's not as sort of fragile as I once thought. And even with vintages where we have disease pressure, still amazing that you can look at the fruit and think, oh, I should get it in now. It's looking like there's a little bit of disease pressure there. Ferment the wines and they're still looking beautiful after fermentation, which is great.
Now, you were speaking about checking in on your fermentations from home, working from home, which leads me to a question that I've been asking all the winemakers recently. How did the pandemic impact your harvest and or things at the winery? I mean, you're in New Zealand, so you're probably in one of the peachiest spots in the world right now when it comes to the pandemic. Yeah. But what kind of impact did it have upon you?
Yeah, I mean, look, my kind of view is probably a bit different to the other guys that were on the ground in Marlborough, because it was pretty scary for me. I was in Marlborough, and then how it happened in New Zealand, it happened very quickly. I mean, there was a matter of 48 hours and you had to get home, or you might not get home. And I had my children up on Waiheke with their nanny, who was from Marlborough, and an older friend, family friend. And so she was panicking about getting back to Marlborough to her husband. My husband and I, who are both in Marlborough, were panicking about trying to get home to our children. And I guess it was for everybody, it was that kind of unknown. Like now we know if we have a lockdown, okay, there are ways you can get home, or it's not going to last forever, But back then there was just that whole sense of what is going to happen and how long is this going to be for? And we couldn't actually get flights when we first looked, so we were really panicking. And then we found another way to get home, so we got home. But at that stage, we hadn't even really started harvest, and so for me, it was quite stressful. And that I had my two children at home. My husband was working full time down in his office, and then I was also having to manage vintage from afar. Obviously, with the technology I was speaking about before, it made things easier, but still sort of had to actually get the fruit off the vine.
Yeah, it's kind of like abandoning your.
Not talk to anybody, and that happened. So, so that was quite challenging. And look, I know that from the guys on the ground, and certainly the guys that I work with, it was pretty stressful having to very quickly get procedures in place, for the staff, and basically locking all the wineries down just with the staff that are there. And even if I had been in Marlborough, I wouldn't have been able to just rock up to the winery, go in and taste. And you definitely got your sort of small slot, whether it be half an hour or something like that, where you could go into a container and samples will be there for you, so you're not seeing anybody or coming into contact with anybody. Luckily, and I'm sure the other winemakers have said, luckily it was a fantastic harvest.
Yes.
There was
Yeah.
no pressure, no disease pressure, no rain events. Everything got harvested. There was, I think at one stage the concern was more about getting fruit off, with the hand pickers and crews and things like that. But because we didn't have any stressful weather, it meant that fruit could just hang out anyway and just wait its turn until pickers could get to it. And I think a lot of people probably used the machine harvesters, that sort of way of harvesting more. People that might have usually hand-picked some Sauvignon might have just thought, right, we'll get it off quickly via machine. So it's good having the options.
Sorry. Did you see a major impact on your export markets?
I think, from my perspective, from the wines I'm making, we are predominantly restaurant.
Yes.
On premise, we're not in the supermarkets. So yeah, of course, when you saw each country sort of lock down and things like that, it was quite tough in those first few months, quite impacted. But I think we've since seen, as things open up, then there's a real surge. And so it's sort of a little bit like, rather than sort of more consistent, you have your times of, great sales and then times of like not much at all. So it's quite hard to sort of gauge and to plan for that. Yeah. But certainly impacted. But I guess we're still lucky that we're here and we're making wine and we're selling wine and we're still afloat. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution today. Hopefully, once this pandemic is behind us, we can meet up for a glass of wine in Toronto at some point.
I would love that. That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Jamie.
Excellent. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate that.
No problem. Have a great rest of the day or evening.